This is Media Sales Mastery, the podcast for media sales professionals. In each episode, we bring you information, insights, and ideas from some of the industry's top thought leaders. Connect with us to help pick the topic and guide the show.
This is Media Sales Mastery, the podcast for media sales professionals. I'm your host, Jamie Wood. Our topic today, quality client questioning. Now, one of the great contradictions of media sales, or sales in general, is this idea that the people who are the good talkers naturally make the best salespeople. You know, in Australia, there's an expression called having the gift of the gab, and we typically use that as a way of describing people who throw pretty good chat. Being a great talker is helpful in our profession, there's no question, but it's actually the complete opposite that really matters the most. The ability to not talk too much, but rather to ask great questions and to listen actively. Our guest today is Stephen Pead. Now, Stephen is a media industry veteran of 30 years. He's got significant experience across direct sales, sales management, general management. He is based in Sydney, but he has extensive international experience. He currently consults to media sales organizations and media sales teams all around the globe. He has a particular focus on some of these frontier emerging markets on the African continent, in parts of Asia, in parts of India. So really broad experience to draw from today, and really excited to get into it. You know, before we get into the topic, I'm going to hit you with some spam. If you find me annoying on this podcast, you're going to really find me annoying on LinkedIn, which is where you need to connect with me to give me questions that you want to cover on the podcast, topics that you think we should run. Just interact with the posts that I put up. Sometimes I get like 50 likes, other times I get nothing. So I'm just going to kind of continue to do that. But I really appreciate that everyone who's kind of reaching out to me via mostly direct messages has been giving me some really encouraging feedback about what we're trying to achieve with this podcast. So there's a link in the show notes to my LinkedIn, or it's Jamie Wood, very easy to find. And I want to get to a point where LinkedIn send me one of their branded LinkedIn hoodie jumpers. I feel like I will have made it as a LinkedIn person when that happens. So LinkedIn, if you're listening, hook me up. Anyway, let's jump into the episode.
The first five.
Stephen, welcome.
Thank you very much, Jamie, and great to be here too.
Mate, you know, the irony is you consult a lot around the world. You do a lot of virtual calls, and you and I are both in the same country, and I think we've had more technical issues setting up this podcast than you've had in your career to date. So I apologise profusely for wasting so much of your time before we even hit record, mate.
Now, all good fun, and it's one of those things just to test the metal, as they say.
That's exactly right. Well, hey, look, before we jump in, you've had a really unique kind of career journey. I'd love if you could give us a bit of an overview of what you're currently doing in the media space and just a bit of your background as well.
Most of my career has been in the radio industry, and back when I was just a mere slip of a boy, I decided that I wanted to be a star, and worked on 3 different radio stations as an announcer. But along the way, I figured that probably I wasn't going to be a star, and thought, gee, these sales guys seem to have a pretty good life. They've got nice cars and they just come and go as they want. So I asked the sales manager for the opportunity. And like all good sales managers, he thought there was another person for the team. So off we went. And he gave me a prospect list, which was fantastic, Jamie. Yellow pages, A to K.
We just had Tony Prentice on the podcast, and he shared the exact same anecdote.
But the good thing is he wouldn't give me L to Z, because he said, I've got another new rep starting and I've got to hold back, mate, sorry. But like many of us, I really didn't get much true sales training at the beginning. I bumbled through, and I think I made every single rookie mistake known to any salesperson in the world. Until, thank God, a client helped me. He was a guy that had been advertising with the station for a while, and I was allocated him. And he sold shutters and awnings. And he said to me one day, he said, how about the hell you shut up and let me tell you my problems? And I thought, oh, okay. So I did. I listened for a change, and I really listened, and he told me some stuff about his business. And all of a sudden, I sort of realised I could maybe put some kind of a proposal together that might sort of solve some of his problems. And thank God he did, because I think I would have kept on doing what I was doing, which was just talking and talking and talking myself out of every single sale. So, back in the day, it all seemed to work, and I ultimately progressed to the role of sales manager in a number of markets, and ARN even trusted me at some stage to make me a GM, and they let me run one of their biggest stations, WSFM in Sydney. So I guess things went along pretty smoothly in the radio industry until I decided that there must be something more, and the opportunity came up with a company called NRS Media. And NRS Media had not only radio clients, but TV and newspaper clients. And their key bottom line was sales training, was how to train salespeople and coach them. And I guess that's where it all clicked for me. And I really started to learn what sales training was really about and what sales in media was all about as well, across that, at that stage, mainstream media, radio, television, newspaper. And then in 2014, I sort of kicked off my own consultancy called Sales Solutions. And that's still what I do today. And I get a lot of pleasure out of it, because my career has been involved, nearly all of it, in the sales space. And it's been great to be able to help people to get better at what they do.
You know, when you and I were actually having a chat, you recommended, or you suggested, the topic of quality client questioning. Across your experience, like with coaching, consulting, I know you do a lot around the world. I know you're doing a bit in Africa, and you've done Asia, India, pretty much everywhere. Yeah. Where does this skill rank in terms of importance for media sales professionals?
Well, it's a great question, and there's so many different components of a sale. But for mine, I think it's a pretty important part of selling, and regrettably, it's still a major weakness for many salespeople, not only in the media sales space, but right across the gamut of business and industries. From my mind, I think questioning should be a part of every single sales meeting. One of the things a sales manager should say to the guys is, hey guys, what's the question of the week? What was the question that you asked a client that really worked for you? And of course, on the flip side, guys, what happened when you asked this question, and did it die on its feet? So I think it's really important. And yeah, I understand that you've got to prospect. We've all got to find the clients that we want to work with. We've got to qualify the opportunities, and yep, we've sure as hell got to make sure we're talking to the right person. We've got to make appointments, all of those components of the sales process. But if you can't actually engage the customer and have some kind of a conversation and uncover their real needs, you're in a big hole, if I can use that phrase. And then to combine that with the questioning, if you can't actually listen carefully to what those answers are and then put them all together, you're in an even bigger world of hurt.
It's a perfect setup for the main topic.
Media sales mastery.
Because we often make this assumption in media sales, or really in any sales, that client questioning is something that we predominantly do in that sort of discovery process, that initial meeting with the client. And I'm curious, you touched a little bit on it in the intro, but, is client questioning something that's actually required throughout the entire sales and after sales process? And if so, where in particular, is it most important?
I think you and I both know that the right questions at the right time really start from the moment you decide to pick up the phone and actually talk to a potential customer all the way through the process. And you're right, questioning is used primarily, and most salespeople get it, that it's used primarily within the context of the discovery meeting. And I think that's where it has the biggest impact. But if you can't develop and ask some really great questions during that prospecting phase, and when you're really qualifying the opportunity, there's not even going to be an opportunity to ask for a meeting. And then there's negotiating. There's dealing with the various concerns that customers have, dealing with objections, closing. all of those areas, they need their own set of questions peculiar to those areas as well. And of course, once the sale is made, as we all know, that's when the real work begins, because you then have to try and deliver on the promises you've made, create that trust environment, and then work together for the longer term. And once again, you need questions at that stage of the process too.
It's a good call, because I think, we often have new media salespeople coming in, and often they're kind of given like a bit of a list of questions. Like this is the questions you'd ask in a discovery meeting. And I've always found that whilst they might be well-intentioned, those types of questions or those types of frameworks, they can really, if they're not deployed correctly or authentically, they can really cause some issues. Are there some missteps you kind of see with the reps you train? Like, what are some of the errors that media sales professionals are quite likely to make starting out on this sort of client questioning, building their competence with client questioning?
I guess the biggest mistake I see, and it happens over and over, particularly when I go in field and do some in-field coaching with salespeople, and that's nothing more or less than the salesperson selling themselves and their product without any real relevance to the client or the customer. And with all of the training resources and the commitment that companies make to training, I still can't believe that this actually happens, but it does. And I think you did a post on LinkedIn not so long ago, a couple of weeks ago, I think it was, and you were talking about going out on a date and only talking about yourself. And it is still the biggest mistake I see, and I'm sure you see it when you're working with some of your sales team and through the years that you've been working in field as well, that salespeople want to talk about themselves, they want to talk about their product. And of course, we're all proud of the product that we sell, but it gets to a point where the client's eyes just glaze over. So I guess that's the biggest mistake from my perspective, is the salesperson selling themselves, selling their product, and not knowing how it actually fits with the customer. That's the first one. The second biggest common error is when a salesperson, particularly a newer one, asks a couple of what I describe as low value questions, and many times the low value questions actually alienate the client. And rather than uncover opportunities, they actually can't gain any traction whatsoever. And the minute that starts to happen, the salespeople then revert back to point one, which is, let's go back to talking about myself. Let's go back to talking about my product all over again.
But I think you're absolutely right, because talking about your product or yourself as a salesperson, it's comfortable. We know our product, we know our brands, we know what we do. And I think a lot of the time it's just when you're in front of a client, there can be that intimidation factor of, I need to show that I know what I'm talking about here, and what's easy to talk about. It's the product I know. I think it's almost human nature. It's a tendency that we naturally have as a bit of a safety mechanism, I'd say.
I think that's a great point. That's a good point. But the thing that surprises me is I've been in field with salespeople of 2, 3, in some cases more years experience, and they still revert under pressure back to the talk about me, talk about the product situation. And I guess we've talked about number one and number two. The last and most common mistake is also when a newer salesperson gets the concept, understands the questioning concept, but then I guess I'd use the phrase, doesn't prepare some relevant questions for that specific call. So then they fall back on what you were talking about a couple of minutes ago, which is general type questions or generic type questions. And then it starts to fall apart once again, because those questions aren't relevant necessarily to that particular subject. And I often say to salespeople, if you're going to put some good questions together for that specific call based on your due diligence, do a dry run with someone, do a dry run with one of your friends, or do a dry run with the sales manager and test the validity of the question. I mean, while it's on a piece of paper, it might look valid, but when it's asked, it sounds dumb. And I guess From my perspective as a sales coach, though, it is one of the easy fixes, if I can describe it that way, because at least when a salesperson is asking generic or general type question, it proves to me that at least they get the concept and they're now trying to master the skill of questioning. So yeah, they're the three big ones. Talking about themselves, asking low value questions, and then under pressure falling back into talking about themselves and product, or asking generic type questions when they should be asking quite specific type questions.
And I think I love that rundown, mate. And to me, I think what's interesting is, we've done a podcast in the past around sort of building business acumen, but a lot of the time where you see experienced reps, they're comfortable in market. They've obviously run a lot of uncovery or discovery meetings. They know how to hold their own with clients. But the ones that really separate the good ones are the ones who have good business acumen and know how to speak to a business owner around the things that a business owner is, are going to find important or things that matter. And I'm mindful that, for a lot of new media salespeople, they're coming in straight away there, particularly as the market's becoming a lot more complex. We're expecting media salespeople to learn a lot more products, to sell across a lot more verticals. For people who are relatively new and are just learning the craft, is there any sort of a framework or maybe a process for client questioning that you might recommend they use just to get the basics down?
Yeah, it's a tough one. It's a tough one for new people, and particularly for younger people when they're talking to a client that's in their 40s or 50s. It's all of a sudden, I feel under a whole lot of pressure. Can I really make the point? Can I ask the questions? Do I have the right? And before I answer that question about the framework, I just wanted to hark back to some research that I was involved in, must be 6-7 years ago now. And it was in some regional markets. And if my memory serves me, it was like Albury, Wollongong, Wagga, Ballarat, I think. There's some of the markets. And I had the opportunity by myself to talk to some of the local advertisers and got the feedback on what local salespeople were talking about and what local salespeople were asking them. And I'm now not just talking about radio guys, I'm talking about newspaper salespeople and the TV guys and digital at that particular stage as well. And some of the responses I got from local advertisers was really quite interesting. And for a newer salesperson, it's worthwhile thinking about this. One guy said to me, what really bugs me is the salespeople that ask the same question in a different way over and over, because what I'm giving them doesn't really fit with what they want.
Yeah.
The other one was, one client said, salespeople continually interrupt my answers when they think they know what I want to say. And in the end, I close down. I just stop saying it. And that, once again, means that I guess they don't really find out what my real problem is. And one of the best ones that I think I received in a response was this. It was a lady, actually, that ran a business. And she said, it bugs me when media salespeople assume things and say stuff like, I'm sure you'll agree. And even before I get the opportunity to say, no, I don't actually agree, they've just gone off on a tangent talking about their product. So it was a great experience to hear what customers had to say. And the more questions I asked, it was really quite amazing how people wanted to talk about it, because they too get it. Many clients get that if a salesperson does bother to take the time with them and discover some of those pain points, some of the opportunities, they know they'll benefit as well. But it seemed to me in those markets that we were talking about that it just didn't happen.
Yeah, and it's funny, mate, because I think, in the direct market at the moment, obviously I've got a team who sells across direct, independent agency and agency, and there's a very different approach required across the three customer sets. But the one thing that's really interesting at the moment is, particularly as the agencies become busier, as they become, if they've got resource constraints, almost their tolerance to kind of indulge some of the reps with a lot of questions in the uncovery is really low. And it's always really interesting going from that from that side of the fence to then maybe indirect, where you're going, a lot of the time it feels like these SMEs actually really want to give more information because they know it's ultimately going to create a better solution for them. But reps often kind of come in and they have the end in mind, and they don't explore the possibility. They're almost trying to lead the client down a predetermined path.
Yep.
Which it sounds like what you're talking about there. And
exactly.
Yeah, because I think, mate, the thing I find interesting is, we talk a lot about the client presentation and the pitch and the proposal as being, those are our times to stop asking the questions, and that's where we go back and we give them the solution and we persuade them that we've got the right solution. I'm curious to know where client questioning can play a role in that part of the sales process. Does that actually present an opportunity, for really good targeted questioning as well? And if so, could you unpack some examples of how that might kind of play out?
A couple of years ago, LinkedIn Insights shared some research and found that clients are 5 times more likely to engage with a sales professional who offers new insights and solutions that are generally or specifically tailored to their business. And I think salespeople listening to this podcast would agree that by the time the presentation comes around, you really need to find a way, particularly in direct sales, to have the client on board. And for mine, questioning lets you do that. And to go back to your earlier question about framework, the framework is critical so that a salesperson knows the track they're on. And there's a whole heap of different sales processes around the world. But the simplest one I use when I'm training salespeople, particularly if that company doesn't have an ingrained sales process, is a couple of key steps. Firstly, when you get to the meeting with the client, an introduction, obviously, this is who I am. And then the next step is to earn the right. And this particularly goes back to that comment I made earlier. If the salesperson's 25 and the client's 45, 50-year-old, what gives you the right to sit here in front of me and talk to me about my business? What can you bring to the table? The third thing is agenda, to explain the why. Why are you here? Why are you going to ask me some questions? What value are you bringing? And then the key part of any uncovery or discovery meeting is the question component, the discussion component, when the salesperson's looking for an opportunity or a need or a pain point that they can explore further. And the last 2 points, of course, is the summary and then a confirmation to seek approval from the client that you can come back with a proposal. Because going specifically to your question, many salespeople, particularly in the direct space, bring back a proposal without what I call permission. And I think as part of the sales process, if you say, look, I've heard what you've got to say today, Tom. Here's what I'm hearing. Am I right in saying this is issue A, this is issue B? And the client agrees. Would you be happy if I put some thoughts together and came back with a plan in the next couple of days? It can be as simple as that, or it can be a lot more complex. But at least by asking, if I can use that phrase, permission to bring back a proposal, oftentimes you'll get much more traction at the time when you do bring that proposal back, which goes back to that specific question about when the process is to put to the proposal to the client. When can you actually ask the questions, and what questions can you ask?
The negotiation stage is always a really interesting one around questioning too, because oftentimes this is where, again, as media salespeople, we can quite often default to, the objection handling, or we can come back and try to kind of talk our way around a potential kind of objection or an issue or a barrier the client might be raising. And again, I just think that the best people who can really overcome those types of scenarios and can really kind of lead the negotiation to a really kind of good place are the ones who actually use really strategic questioning.
Yes.
To draw that out of the client more. So, the example I always love is is if a client raises an issue, or even if the body language changes, hey, when we were presenting that slide, I just sort of saw you cross your arms a bit. Is there something here that's maybe missing for you, or is there, is something here maybe not landing? Like, you're going to hear a hell of a lot more from the client by asking a question like that than trying to kind of then oversell what it is on that slide.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And once again, you've got younger people listening and newer salespeople listening to this podcast will say, hell, there's all this stuff I've got to do. And it is. It's sometimes not as simple as just black and white. But by listening carefully to the answer to the question that you've just asked and observing as closely as you can the feelings and what the client's actually emanating to you in body language can uncover a whole gamut of stuff that is really quite amazing. And going back to that point you've just made, mate, I see when I just explained that to you or showed that part of the proposal to you, you felt uncomfortable. Is there something I said, or is there something in there that you don't agree with? To have the guts to ask that question can be quite amazing, because the client might say, well, look, that's not where we were going when I thought we had this meeting a week ago, or whatever it happened to be.
That's a great call, mate. I think the main thing too, and it's maybe jumping back to another point, but when you do talk about young salespeople, yeah, there is a lot to learn, right? And we're not expecting you to have a great commercial acumen and to really know your product and know how to sit in front of a business owner and hold your own across every element. But to some extent, that can be an advantage too, if you come at it from a level of being inquisitive. The advice you hear a lot of new media sales reps get is, you don't have to be an expert in their industry. You're the media expert. You just have to be an expert in media. And I think the way that's interpreted is, I just need to know my product really well and talk about my product. And it's actually a case of going, no, you've got to go in there and just be comfortable to be a bit vulnerable and just be inquisitive. Hey, look, I've not really worked across this particular industry before. Can you just give me an understanding of, how the business actually makes money? Like, I know you sell cars, but do you make money from aftermarket? Do you make money from upselling, in terms of additional features? Do you make money from rebates from the manufacturers? Like, I'd love to, it's like a question like that positioned the right way. It's not showing you don't know what you're talking about. It just shows a genuine level of interest in the client. And I'm yet to meet a client who doesn't want to talk about their industry or category ad nauseum when they're asked the right question either.
100% correct. And I've seen through the years newer salespeople go in and do exactly what you've just said, in the sense of saying, hey, my manager suggested one of the questions I should ask you was, and then ask the question. And clients always love to talk about their business. And using the car dealer example, my manager said that one of the areas where you guys can make some good margins is in the used car area. Is that right, or is that just an urban myth? And the client will say, nah, that's rubbish, mate. But immediately that happens, you've got some kind of a conversation going. And when I say to salespeople, you've got to earn the right to talk to someone who's more experienced and older than you, one of the best ways to earn that right is exactly what you just said, Jamie, and that is to be inquisitive and to put yourself out there, to expose yourself and say, look, I'm new to this. I can talk about radio, or I can talk about outdoor till the cows come home, but what I don't know a lot about is your business. Can you help me? And many people will.
Absolutely, mate. I think, and it's interesting I can talk about my business. It's probably a good segue into the kind of final question, which I think a lot of media salespeople at this point in time will be struggling with, right? And I think COVID has exacerbated this. And the common issue is that the businesses that they work for are requiring a lot more information when they're briefing internally. So, you bring a brief in, you've got a bunch of internal stakeholders, and I think media salespeople over the last couple of years, the stakes have been a lot higher around revenue. There's been a lot more pressure to close, and it's been like, you've got to do a solid uncovery, you've got to ask what it takes to win the deal, you've got to come in with a really good understanding of what we need to do to win it. And what sort of happens is usually a lot of these questions are more detail-based. It's around timing, it's budget, it's demographic. It's very specifically related to what our products, are. Question would be, how does a media salesperson kind of balance this? So, they've got to capture all of this information, of course, because they need to then be able to translate it internally. But how do they do that in a way where they don't overwhelm the client with too many questions or potentially, turn the client off by just being a little too direct and asking for some of this information?
Yep, I completely understand. And it is a challenge. And I think the background and the context that you've just set is the real issue. From my perspective, when you're talking to a client, you've got to worry about that moment and that moment only. Wipe what's going on in the back of your mind, which is, well, I've got to get this information because when I get back, A, B, and C are going to ask me these questions. So, yes, you do have to brief internal stakeholders to firstly create the proposal or put together a solution. But the big challenge, I guess, is that you don't have to have all of that information. And once again, by gaining agreement from a client or a customer to come back with a plan to help solve an identified issue, I think the salesperson has earned the right, if I can use that phrase, to suggest to the customer some what-ifs to the client. And the best way to do it is to say, look, if we decided to go ahead with this, are we talking about next month or are we talking about the month after? That immediately gives you some kind of a timing. If we decided to do that, normally I would recommend to a business like yourselves that this is going to cost somewhere between $40,000 to $45,000. Is that a figure in your mind, or is that out of the ballpark? So straight away, if you get an answer to either of those two questions, you've got a vague idea now about timing, and you've got a vague idea about budget. And so when you go back to those internal stakeholders, you don't have to always be absolutely 100% specific, but you can say, look, this is where we are. This is the issue that I uncovered. This is what I'd like the proposal to help him with. He's thinking about next month or the month after broadly, and he's got a budget somewhere in the area of about $45,000. We know his target market is 30 to 45-year-olds, and it tends to have a skew towards women. So if he still gets pressure or she still gets pressure from the internal stakeholders, there's nothing wrong with, once again, the phone call follow-up to a client that you've got that starting relationship with to say, look, I was thinking about our conversation today. I was thinking about our conversation yesterday, and there's just got a couple of questions that have come up, so I can ask you these before I put the proposal together. Is that okay? And that way, get that information too.
I think it's a fantastic approach, mate, and I really like the positioning of those questions. It sort of removes a bit of the friction, like, oh, how much, what's your budget? It's like, well, typically to be in the range of X. I think sometimes it's, it's not what you say, it's often how you say it that can really make the difference. And again, this is muscle memory, right? As I say to a lot of media salespeople starting out, in order to have really good meetings, you just have to have a lot. and you have to have a lot of bad ones, right? You have to have a lot of awkward ones.
You're going to have bad ones, for sure. And it goes back to that conversation that I had right at the beginning. Hey, I made every mistake known to man. I'm sure most people that have been in the sales industry for a while have made every mistake right at the beginning and throughout their career. And it's only experience that helps you deliver those issues along the way.
That's exactly right, mate. And I think I'm stealing that quote because the actual quote is, in order to write a hit song, you have to write a lot of songs. So I remember...
Is that right?
Yeah, I remember hearing that and translating it to our world. But hey, look, let's jump into our listener question.
I can't ask my sales manager that.
So this one was submitted on LinkedIn. That's where everyone connects with the show at the minute. What's been really cool, and you'd know this probably too, is that we have people all around the world who listen to this podcast, and surprisingly, they all have the same issues. It's like Africa, India, Asia, America. Everybody's kind of dealing with the same challenges in this wonderful world of media, which I think is actually really reassuring. So let's get into the question now, and then you and I can unpack it.
Sure.
Cool. Hey, Jamie, I listened to a podcast you did around selling media in a weak economy. I feel like we're still in difficult economic times, and often it's hard for clients to see opportunities for growth. This makes it challenging to persuade them to advertise. Are there any techniques that you can recommend in the discovery process to unearth opportunities that the client may not be aware of themselves? Wow, what a great question.
Terrific question. And I guess the second part of that question is, how do you persuade an advertiser to advertise? And that's the key. It's not our job to persuade them to advertise, because the minute we start doing that, we're back to talking about ourselves and talking about our product, and proverbially pushing something uphill with a shovel, which is very, very difficult. It's not our job to get them to advertise. It's our job to ask some key questions that will help them think, that is an issue. That is a problem for my business. Have you got any ideas, Mr. Media Salesperson? And that's where it comes to that part where you said, are there any techniques that you can recommend in the discovery process? And it all comes down to asking the right question about the business, because oftentimes when you're asking questions, I've seen clients come back to me and say something along the lines of, no one's ever asked me that before. Let me think about it for a moment.
Yeah.
And once again, an inexperienced salesperson will jump in and break the silence. When a client actually has that moment of silence and you can see them, starting to think, you feel like saying, don't say a word. He who talks now loses. For God's sake, just don't talk. And all of a sudden, the client will give you the answer to the question. So there's no real, I don't think, techniques other than to say, if you've done your due diligence on that client, if you know a bit about their business from their website or other sources, put some questions together that will help you uncover some of the issues, challenges that they've got, maybe with their competitors, maybe with their current customers, maybe with their pricing, maybe with their market. All of those things can all be unpacked very, very quickly. But then you start to talk about their business. And when you're talking about their business, all of a sudden, something will come up and you can say, well, why do you say that? Or is that a real issue for you? Is that a real concern for you?
This question, you're right, you break it into parts, and some of it is difficult. You can't just persuade someone to advertise, but
you can't.
The techniques in that discovery process to unearth opportunity the client may not be aware of, I thought was an interesting area, because to me, and again, I did put something on LinkedIn recently, but I remember when I started out selling media direct, at all of 23, I was surprised actually how many campaigns I was working on where they weren't necessarily in a position where they needed to grow their customer base as a business. So, a lot of businesses are doing quite well. Hey, look, we can bring you new customers, or we can help you grow your business. You know what? We're doing fine, actually. Like we're at about capacity. And the most interesting campaigns were actually where they were looking to target a kind of different secondary audience. Some of them were trying to advertise so that their community could hear what they were doing. Some of them were trying to advertise because they just wanted their competitors to to hear them and get a little bit, a little bit of the blood boiling there. Some of them wanted to advertise because they had, potential desires to sell the business, or to get people to come in and maybe buy a franchise in the business, or they wanted to work with different government departments, or position themselves to win a tender, and they knew that they needed to build their brand. So I think the one thing I'd say here for this person is, it's difficult in difficult economic times, because you can prospect clients that are doing well at the moment, and a lot of the time those clients are doing well because they're almost doing well just as a consequence of their part of the economy's firing, so they don't need to advertise to grow their business.
Correct.
And then other clients are kind of battening down the hatches because things are tight and they don't want to spend. So somewhere in the middle there, it's kind of about trying to identify where the opportunities for growth might be, or where the more relevant opportunities might be to communicate to a broader audience about something in the business, as opposed to just that direct advertising in order to attract new customers to the business.
Yeah. And using those examples that you've just put forward, it's not always about new business. Sometimes it could be as simple as, I've got some issues with customer retention. That's not growing your business. That's holding on to what you've already got. It could be something as simple as, I want to grow the average sale of my business, and all of the things that you just mentioned a couple of minutes ago. So the right questions at the right time uncover what the real issue is for that customer at that moment.
Yeah, I mean, the good example, I'll lean on my radio days. I mean, there were definitely times where there'd be a big out-of-home buy for the radio station, and you'd see the Brekkie team plastered around the market on billboards, and you kind of go, you know, they're kind of the clear number one in the market, and do we really need to advertise this book? And a lot of the time, actually, the staff morale was a big part of the reason we'd advertise it, was just getting everyone to proudly sort of say that that's their brand. And obviously, when you're cold calling clients, they're familiar with the station, or they're more familiar with the station because they see it around the market. So those types of things are really interesting at the moment. And I think, you know, the podcast episode this person was referencing was with Josh Bastide out of Arabian Radio Network, who at the time I actually called him the night Australia went into the first COVID lockdown. And he shared some interesting insights because they had been contending with COVID for a little bit longer than we had at that point. And he made a point of just really clever changing of messaging for clients. You know, how do you potentially identify just a way to kind of go out and talk to the community about what the business is doing that isn't just straight advertising, it's more of a branding exercise, but it's going to pay dividends. So there's not really one answer for this person, but I think it's just a case of probably applying all the techniques you've covered off today, and really just kind of being quite inquisitive and really asking around the whole kind of business, around where some opportunities might exist.
Yeah. Yeah. And going back to that point I made, it's not, you can't persuade a business to advertise. I don't believe you can. I believe they need to persuade themselves via that discussion that you have, and they go, you know, that is an issue. I hadn't thought about that before, but now you've made the point. Wow, I hadn't thought about that. Have you got any ideas?
Yeah.
Now, that's not persuading somebody. That's saying, hey, maybe I can help. I can put together a plan and let's see where it goes.
Mate, I think that's a really, really good point. Well, look, we're at the end of the episode, mate. Really, really good to chat with you. I don't want to let you go before you give me a bit of a spiel on what you're doing at the moment. Who are you working with? What kind of stuff are you doing in your business, mate?
Sure.
Curious to just kind of know what the world of Stephen Pead looks like on a normal week.
The group I'm doing some work with at the moment is a fascinating group, and I just did a Zoom call with them last week. And it's a group based out of Kuala Lumpur, the Asian Broadcasting Union. And they have members from literally all around the world. And last week and the week prior, we were doing some work on leadership, and they had key leaders from a variety of organisations, mainly electronic media, and in association with a university based in, I'm going to say Toronto, but I think it's Vancouver in Canada. We're doing this leadership course, and part of the leadership course, where I fitted in, was to help the team on sales management and salespeople, because generally the people on the course are non-sales people, and they see sales as something that's a bit voodoo-ish, if I can describe that phrase, and so we're working with them to help them see that sales is not just for the sales team. Sales in any media organisation these days is for everybody, whether you're the CFO or whether you're the receptionist and everything in between. Everyone has a role to make sure that the company is ready to make the opportunity or to take advantage of the opportunity that's available. So yeah, that's what I'm currently working on, and it's fascinating because the ABU have members from Asia, India, Pakistan, Africa, South Africa. So it's an amazing group of people, and we're having a lot of fun doing that.
Yeah, they're a great organisation. I've actually done a little bit for them in the past through Radio Days Asia, and also a bit of training with some groups out of, I think, Sri Lanka it was that I did. And Steve and the team run a fantastic business there. So sounds very interesting, Stephen. Well, look, I'm going to put a connection or a link to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes for anyone who wants to reach out. And I would encourage everybody just to follow Stephen, certainly, for coaching, for training development, for even getting him into your business to do some consulting. He's very, very, very well regarded across the entire media landscape and came to me via referral. As I said, who do I need on the podcast? And literally about 5 people tagged you as the first person. So
it was very nice of them.
Yes. Well, look, I thank you for spending the time with us tonight, mate. And we certainly wish you all the very best with your business and your future endeavours.
Jamie, it was fantastic. Thank you for the kind invitation. And hopefully, and I say this in any training session, if out of this podcast, anybody listening can take 1 or 2 things away, I've done my job.
Stephen Pead, thank you very much.
Cheers.